So today, what I want to do is I want to introduce you to the Chandra source catalog, and in particular to version 2 of the Chandra source catalog. With me today are Rafael Brusco, who's the lead of the Chandra archive, and Francesca Civano, who's lead of the operations team for the telescope, who are also part of the Chandra source catalog team. And my intention here is just to give you a brief overview of what the catalog is, and then I will show you a Jupyter notebook to teach you how to access different features of the catalog and how to actually do a little bit of science with it by using very simple examples. The Chandra source catalog, the version 2 of the Chandra source catalog, was released a few months before the whole pandemic story started in October 2019. It currently contains a catalog compiled from observations from the beginning of the mission all the way to the end of 2014. And that includes over 315,000 unique sources in the sky. And what you see here is a visualization of where those sources are. I will talk a little bit about the stacks in a bit, but basically what you see here in this map is the color indicates how many observations you have in each stack that you use to detect your sources. And the size of the dot here indicates the number of detections in each of those stacks. So apart from having the properties and data products for those 315,000 sources, we also have properties for almost 1 million individual observations because sources can be observed more than once by the telescope. And so we also provide the properties in the catalog for individual observations of each source. And we have about 7,000 stacks for which, from which those properties are constructed. So what the catalog is not just a list of properties. The catalog also offers you the possibility to bring down data products. So apart from characterizing and providing variability, spectral, photometry, astrometry properties for each of those sources, the catalog also provides access to data products, such as, for example, you see down there a few things. For example, you can get spectral models. So for each source that has enough counts, for each detection that has enough counts, we actually fit different types of spectral models and provide the best fitting parameters of those models. We also provide things like light curves. So if you're interested in variability, specifically in the short term for individual observations of a particular source, you can obtain the light curve for that source. So the catalog is more just than a collection of tables, and that's important for you to know. You can use both the tables, but you can also use the data products. Let's see if I can move to the next slide. So this is just to show you the advantages of doing stacked detections of the sources. So the version 1 of the catalog had the detections done at the individual observation level. That will be the image to the right here. When you in fact stack observations, you significantly improve the detection threshold for sources, as you can see here in the left. And this is for the same area of the sky corresponding to the Chandra Deep Field South. And you see that when you stack many of the observations, you get a much better detection capabilities here for the sources. So Chandra source catalog version 2 relies on those stack observations. And in fact, as I mentioned before, as you see here in this kind of hierarchical distribution of the different components of the catalog, we have both. The detection is done at the stack level. So we stack observations. Those observations need to be close enough to each other in the pointing so that the PSF issues don't kick in. You know that as you move off axis in a Chandra image, your PSF degrades and gets elongated and bigger. So you want, before you stack images, you want to make sure that they are close enough in the sky. So we limit that to 1 arcminute. And we detect on those stack images, and we provide the properties of those sources at that stack level. But we also provide the properties of the pair upside detections. So if you're interested, for example, in looking at how the brightness of a particular source that has been observed several times in the catalog changes over time, then you can go to the observational level properties and see how the fluxes or hardness ratios or et cetera, has changed over time. And on top of that, we have, of course, the master source level, which is the best possible canonical estimation of we have of a source of the properties of a source. And those master level are constructed by combining several stacks that are overlapping, but that are different stacks. So for example, you can have observations that are too far to each other to be in the same part, but if they both contain the source, they will be in two different stacks that are used to construct the properties of the master source. And one interesting aspect of the catalog that I find very useful and that I find very relevant for what has been said along this conference is the variability properties. So we estimate variability properties for sources both in short term and in long term scenarios. So for the long term scenarios, for example, what you want to do is you want to look at how the brightness of a source is changing, or the hardness ratios, because we also estimate variability in the hardness ratios. You want to look at how the probability distribution functions that you see down there for the fluxes of a particular source moves, you know, over different observations. So you observe the same source several times, and when you see that the flux and the probability distribution of the flux is not consistent with a single flux, then that means that source is variable in the long term, so from observation to observation. But also we do different types of tests, like the Kolmogorov-Smirnov tests or the Gregory-Loredo test, to evaluate variability in the short time scales corresponding to a particular single Chandra observation of a source. So you can construct Likers for a source using the Gregory-Loredo algorithm, and we provide those variability diagnostics as part of the catalog as well. And as I mentioned before, we also provide the variability. So that's the very brief introduction I want to give you with my slides. We have plenty of documentation about the catalog in our website. And also you're always welcome to shoot us an email if you have any questions about the catalog. But what I want to do now is actually, I want to present you with a little notebook that I prepared for this session, where I will go through a workflow of how to do things with the Chandra source catalog. So before I start that, do you guys have any questions about what I've said so far? Okay, if not, I'm gonna move on to showing you how to do a few things. The first thing I want to mention, however, is that in our webpage, we do have different ways to access the catalog. We have a number of interfaces that you can use to interact with the catalog. And today I am just going to focus on this interactive notebook that I'm going to share with you. But you have a number of options that you find here. We have a dedicated application that you can download to do queries of the catalog. We also have a quick search web interface. You can use the worldwide telescope to explore the catalog, etc., etc. So make sure that you explore which of these options best fits your interests. But I thought that for this tutorial, this kind of approach using a Jupyter notebook was more appropriate. So if you have gone to the Slack channels, you've seen this notebook on GitHub, and I just want to point out that you want to have a few packages installed in your Python session, and you want to do, if you want to interact with the data products, you also want to have a Chow installation. I recommend the Conda installation of Chow, for which we also provide instructions in our web pages if anyone's interested. And if you want to do a little bit of the last part of this tutorial with inputting some of the properties of the catalog into a machine learning algorithm, that you will also use, will need to install scikit-learn. So what is the aim of this tutorial? I'm going to show you how to do a few things. I'm going to show you how to use a consearch to find sources around a given location, CSC2 sources around a given location. I am going to show you how to use our table access protocol service in order to do more specific and more general queries than you can do with the consearch, specifically by looking at the different levels, as I mentioned before, the master, the stack, the observation level. I am also going to show you how to do a cross match of the Chandra source catalog with other catalogs. In particular, here I'm going to use TUMAS. I'm going to show you how you can do the cross match of these two catalogs. And I am going to also show you how to bring data products down in your Jupyter notebook session and do whatever science you want to do with them. If you want to fit the spectra using, for example, all the things you've learned before on spectral fitting in these tutorials, or that you will learn tomorrow during the Sherpa tutorial, you can also do that. And finally, I'm going to show you how you can input CSC data into a machine learning algorithm using scikit-learn. So for those of you interested in kind of the data science aspect of this, who want to do exploration using machine learning algorithms, the catalog is also a very rich data set for that. So what I'm showing you here is an ESA Sky visualization of M33. And the catalog is already, the Chandra source catalog 2.0 is already accessible for several query services, including ESA Sky, also Vizier, etc., etc. And that means that, for example, in this ESA Sky visualization, you can see the many sources that we have detected as part of the Chandra source catalog around M33. These are the sources that I'm going to use initially to show you a couple of things. And what these sources are, well, that's of course depends on your research. Many of these sources are actually detected serendipitously as part of the catalog. So for many of them, as you probably heard a lot during the conference, we don't know what they are, and we're actually aiming to classify all these sources. But you know, you can make guesses. These are probably, some of these sources are X-ray binaries. That could be an AGN here in the middle, or in different galaxies, etc., etc. So you have different types of sources here. So the first thing I want to show you is how to do the consearch in order to get these sources. And for that, we'll be using AstroPy, where you can define a sky coordinates object, and you can actually use the name of the source to locate that object and define a radius of your search. Once that object is defined, you then create an object for our consearch service that you can do by doing this instruction here. This is our consearch service for the Chandra source catalog 2.0. And then you can even get help as to how to use the consearch tool by doing a consearch help here in your notebook. So you see all the different possibilities. The consearch will not give you a lot of flexibility in terms of exploring the catalog at the different levels. So for example, this will provide you only with the master level table. So this is basically the best canonical estimates for the source properties at the master level, but it will give you all the information about that source at the canonical master level, including the position, etc., etc., and many of the other properties. In order to run the consearch, this is what you do. You just do a consearch with your object, a coordinate object that you have created before, your radius that you have specified before. In this case, I specified a radius of 1 degree around M33. And if you do that, verbosity has to do with how many columns you want to display. The catalog has many columns across many different aspects, variability, spectroscopy, etc., etc., and also for the different bands. So you have properties for the B band, for the hard band, for the medium band, etc., etc. So we have hundreds of columns actually. And so depending on this parameter, you can decide if you want to display them all, or if you want to select only a few ones that are the most representative ones of this catalog. So this query resulted in 750 Chandra source catalog sources in a radius of 1 arcminute around M33, and you can visualize those as a table here. You see here the names, here the coordinates, etc., etc. This is basically a long table with all the coordinates. In fact, you can print them. I could print them all here, but I'm only printing a few of them. So you see here that I'm only printing the first 50 columns of the Chandra source catalog at the master level here. And this includes things, for example, about the source extent, the extent we measure for a particular source, if the source is extended, etc., etc. Here I'm only plotting the names of a few of those sources. So you see that the name starts with a 2CXO. That means this is version 2 of the catalog. Version 1 of the catalog sources are CXO without the 2. And we use the nomenclature with the coordinates to give the name to each of the different sources. You can also iterate over the different sources and print specific properties. So for example, if you're interested in the aperture flux in the B band and the limits, as I mentioned in the slides, these quantities are all estimated using a Bayesian spirit. So they are all probability distribution functions that have confidence intervals, and you can basically plot the limits of those intervals here, display the limits of those intervals here if you want. So for each of those properties will have an upper limit and a lower limit based on the probability distribution function. And you can iterate over them and print all of those properties if you want to do that. But of course, that's even better if you can actually plot it. So here I'm using matplotlib in this cell here to plot the location of the sources, and I am color coding the sources by the source significance. The source significance, which is one of the columns in the Chandra source catalog, gives you an idea as to the signal to noise at which we have detected the source. In particular, in this case, at the master level, that will be the best significance at which the source was detected across many observations. Some of these sources will have been observed only once, but a fraction of them have been observed several times. So at the master level, you will get the best significance across all of the observations of that particular source. And you see here that, of course, the nuclear region, for example, of the galaxy is detected with a high significance, and some other sources that are likely to be X-ray binaries in the spiral arms of the galaxies. And this is a logarithmic scale here of the significance, in case you're wondering, and you see the distribution of significance at which these sources have been detected. So that's a nice visualization of which sources are detected. And of course, that will depend for each source in the Chandra source catalog on the counts that you detect in the source, but also the level of background around that source, etc., etc. Now I'm going to show you how to visualize spectral and variability probabilities of these sources at once. And a way in which I like to plot that is by actually plotting here. And this is all done with matplotlib, nothing very complicated, but you can follow the notebook if you want and try your own things with different properties. But basically here, all I'm doing is I'm selecting the two types of variability that we provide as part of the Chandra source catalog. So var intra-prob, that's the probability of intra-observation variability for a particular source. So that's what's the probability that the source is variable in the short time scale of a single Chandra observation. Whereas var interprob is the probability of variability in the long term. So when you compare observation to observation, is if there was an observation of the source in 2000 and then there was another observation of the source in 2010 and a few more, then how do you so this will give you the variability probability when you look at the fluxes in those individual observations, so in the long term. And all I'm doing here is I am plotting the hardness ratios. So basically something that characterizes the spectral shape of the photons that make part of this observation of this particular detection. So basically the hardness ratios when you consider the hard band and the medium band, and the hardness ratio when you consider the medium band and the soft band. And I have color coded these by variability probability, both in short-term scales and in long-term scales. So you see that here, the sources that have the redder colors are those that have higher probability of being variable in the short-term variability as determined by the Gregory-Loreto algorithm. That is one of the binned algorithms that we heard about during the conference to estimate the probability of variability in a source. So for example, this type of variability will tell you whether during an observation there's been a flare, for example, in a young star, or if there's a rapid transient or a transit. And the redder objects here are those that have larger probability of variability in the long term. So these are objects whose flux is changing considerably over longer periods of time when you compare observation to observation. And you see that they don't always coincide. So depending on the source, so if you're interested, for example, in a very soft source, that would be around here, that is also highly variable at both large scales and short time scales, then you would probably want to select this source here, for example, that seems to be red in both and that has particularly small hardness ratio. So that would be an extremely soft source that has high variability properties. You can always save your searches. If you've performed a search using this concierge service, you can always save that table as part of a FITS file, in a FITS file. And here we show you how to do that by first converting it to a table that you can visualize, and then by writing it to a FITS table that you can then use as you please. All right, so that's the concierge part of this tutorial, and I want to move on next to a little bit more complicated searches using the tab services. Do you guys have any questions up to this point? I guess not. So I will just continue, and remember that you can always ask questions also on the chat or later on by email, etc., etc. So suppose you want to do a little bit of a more complicated search using our tab services, and that's also possible. In order to do that, you also need to define an object here that uses our tab service, and you do that by defining this. For the tab services queries, you use ADQL syntax. So those of you who are familiar with querying, for example, the Gaia archive or SDSS with ADQL or SQL or similar syntaxes know how to do this. But for example, here you are selecting for certain properties from a particular table called the master source table, that is the table of properties at the master source level, for sources whose name includes an X, for example. This is just an example. This is actually not what I do below. But this will, for example, select all the extended sources in the Chandra source catalog because those names will contain an X. So in order to do these searches, you can first invoke the tab service by doing this run here, and then you can check which tables are actually available. And what you see is that we have tables at the master source level, at the stack source level. So this is basically the stack detections when we put together observations that belong to the same stack, and also at the observational level. So we have tables at the 3 different levels, and then we have tables that associate between them. So you want to be able to associate a particular source to the detections in the different stacks in which that source is detected, and also to individual observations in which that source is detected. So you can do that as well. Well, in fact, I do the extended source search here. So basically, in order to use this tab service, you will have to actually write your ADQL search here and write it as text that you define as the variable query here. And then all you have to do is create the table of results that will be done by doing tab search on that query that you have just defined. For those of you who use CSC View, which is the application that you can download from our webpage and do the search, you can always grab something like this syntax from the query that you have defined in CSC View, and then you can go to View and then show source, and then you will see the source of the query that you can always translate to your Jupyter notebook and do the search in this way. So all I did here was I searched the master source table for extended sources, and I got 1,300 extended sources in the Chandra source catalog. These are extended sources that are significantly more extended than a compact source. So a source can be slightly extended, and that's still not listed here. These are the ones that for which you actually define a polygon to define what the source is. So for example, supernova remnants, etc., etc. Those are the sources that belong here. And all I'm doing here is I'm plotting those sources and color coding by their fluxes. So we estimate fluxes in the catalog for those extended sources, and you see here where those extended sources live and which ones are the brightest in X-rays. But suppose you want to do a search at the OBS-ID level. In this case, of course, the nomenclature gets a little bit more complicated, but it's the same concept. You will have you will have to define the specific columns that you want from the Chandra source catalog here. And here I am doing the fluxes, I am doing the variabilities, variability properties. I believe I am doing also the hardness ratios, or maybe not, but I'm selecting a number of sources here. And what you have to note is that here, the properties that I am requesting start with an O dot. That means that they belong to this table, the observation level table. And so we are doing that search here. And we are selecting, we have to say from which tables we need information here. Of course, we will need the observation level tables. We also need the master source level table if you do want to associate each of those detections with a particular source. And here we are saying we want the matches to be unique. The match type indicates whether a source is unique or ambiguous, because precisely because of the issue I mentioned with the PSF, a detection at a very far off axis can be associated to more than one single master source. So you want to make sure, for example, for your science, if you want that, you could make sure that those are uniquely associated to individual master sources. And I am actually searching the entire catalog here, but I am limiting myself to significances at the individual observation level that are larger than 10. So a signal to noise larger than 10, that are not saturated, are not flagged for saturation, are not flagged for living on top of a streak. I am associating them with the name of a particular Chandra source catalog source. So at the end, to do the search, you just do tab search query using the query you just defined, and that will return, in this case, because I limited myself to very high significant sources, only 31,000 objects out of the over 1 million individual detections of sources that we have in the Chandra source catalog. So let's have a look at those individual detections. So for example, here I am plotting I am just doing 2D histograms of the fluxes and the significance for those sources. So of course, there is a correlation between the flux of that particular detection of a source and the significance of that source, and the spread in significance for a particular flux, of course, has to do with things like the background level around that source, etc., etc. But you see that there is a correlation between the two. And here I am actually plotting the flux of the sources against variability sigma. And the variability sigma you can think of as the standard deviation of the light curve of that source. So because we produce the light curves from each of those objects, we can also estimate what is the standard deviation of the deviations from the mean in that light curve, and we can use that as an estimation of how variable the source is. So here I am doing the 2D histogram again, heat map, where you see that most of the sources are around this flux and around this variability sigma. And those that you expect to be more variable are the ones that are, of course, towards the higher part of this plot. So you see, you can play with those properties and visualize and select depending on what interests you. So now I'm going to, what I'm going to do next in this tutorial is I am going to show you how to retrieve specific data products from the Chandra source catalog, and how to display, for example, your light curves or your spectra in case you want to do further analysis. So in order to do that, I am going to use a chow tool that you should have access to if you have a Conda installation or an installation of chow. And that tool is Search CSE. So this is a chow tool that allows you to search the Chandra source catalog. Please be aware of something. Search CSE will not be very efficient if you are going to perform a bulk download. So if you want to download, for example, all of the light curves from the catalog, for example, and you're going to use Search CSE, that will probably saturate the server. If you want to do that, we encourage you to instead send a special request to the Chandra Data Archive, and that you can find also in our web pages if you go to the link that I provided there. So basically, I am just here importing CSC, search CSC from the Chow tools. And I am going to select sources that have a flux larger than certain flux. So I'm just using basically this plot. I am going to select some sources that are up here that I know that are variable. So I'm going to select sources that have certain fluxes, right? Actually between 5, 10 to the 13 and 10 to the 12 ergs per second per centimeter square. And I am also going to select sources that have a variability sigma that is larger than 10 to the minus 3 here. So I am going to be selecting sources that are likely to be variable. I am also selecting by doing an off-axis angle that is small. Just basically, I will limit myself to search for detections in the Chandra source catalog that were done close to the on-axis. So limiting myself here to 3 arc minutes, because those are the units in which this off-axis angle is provided. And I am just plotting the first 20 of those of the detections that returned as part of this query. So what you see here is you have the name of a particular source, the ops ID of the detection, because remember I'm performing a search at the observation level. So I'm looking at individual detections of sources, but I am also associating them with the source that they correspond to. So this gives you the ops ID, right, on which that source was detected, the region, the corresponding region within that ops ID for that source, and the coordinates. So all I did here was select a few detections on which that I believe are variable, and I want to display the light curve and the spectrum for at least one of them. So if in order to do that, I can use search CSC, and search CSC also has limited flexibility. For example, you can use it by inputting the coordinates. In this case, I'm just taking the coordinates of the first object here, and I am passing them as an input for search CSC. I am providing also the name of a table where the properties, where a summary of the properties for those sources that finds will be recorded. And I am here in case you want to you're curious about the nomenclature for search CSC. These are the different parameters that you can enter to search CSC. So a position, a radius, a unit for that radius, an out file, which columns you want, which file types you want, which catalog, either version 1 or version 2. If you want to download them all without asking if you want to download all the data products, etc., etc. So you can go there for extra information, but that's all I'm doing here. I am doing a search CSC query around this position. I am using only a search radius of 1 arc second because I want to only select the first source, and it's unlikely that you'll find more than one source there. And I am going to request the light curves and the spectral files, the pulse high amplitude file and the response files that I need, for example, to perform my Sherpa analysis, for example. And I am requesting this in the case of the light curve for the broadband. And when you run this command, then you will get what is it that you're getting here? You're getting 13 rows. Why 13 rows? Because even though I was interested only on this detection, search CSC will give you all the detections of that particular source here, right? And you will download these files that you requested, the light curve, the PHA, the RMF, etc., for each of those observations, because those are data products, the light curves and the spectra that are defined at the per ops ID at the detection level. So for each detection of that source, you have a light curve. For each detection of that source, you have a spectrum. And so you get all of them. But I was interested only on the first one here, which was ops ID 78, which is actually the first one here that has been downloaded, right? So all you've done here is you've selected some sources of interest based on your visualization here, and you've done a search CSC to perform a coordinate search around that source and get the data products that you requested from that particular observation, and also a table with basic properties for that source in the different observation. So this will download these files to your disk, and now you'll have those files on disk. And now you can import with AstroPy, for example, you can import the light curve of that particular source. You will see that this file will have a light curve and also a light curve for the background. Again, these light curves are constructed using the Gregory-Loredo algorithm for variability that also generates a light curve as an average of different binnings, equal space binnings of the event photon arrivals. And you have the light curve for the source and for the background. And here I am just plotting the light curve for this detection. So this is this source in this particular OBSID, and I am plotting the light curve that I just downloaded from the Chandra source catalog in order to visualize. So you see that this light curve has some clear flickering and flaring behavior here. In fact, this has been previously identified and reported as a candidate for being a magnetic cataclysmic variable in the globular cluster 47 Tucana. So you see the light curve here, and you can download, the light curves that you want to inspect, and you can plot them here. You can plot the error bars of the light curve, etc., by using this search CSCs. All that I'm showing here, you can also do with the CSC view application. You can do a more kind of window graphic selection of your properties. Then you can select which data products you want to download, and you can actually download them. And in fact, you can also, from CSC view, you can transfer that to something like TopCat in order to visualize your tables and also your light curves, etc., etc. So I provide here also a link to how the variability estimation is made using the Gregory-Loredo algorithm, in case you're interested. And now suppose you want to visualize the spectrum for this detection. And you can also do that by using, well, I've already done that because I've already downloaded them when I requested the files. I already downloaded the data products. And all I'm doing here is I'm grabbing, I am now using my Sherpa tools here to load the PHA file. It will automatically also load the response files, as you see here. And I am just going to restrict my energies to energies between 0.3 and 7 kilo electron volts. I'm binning my counts by groups of 10, and I am plotting here using Sherpa plotting options. I'm plotting here my spectrum. I'm not going to do anything else with this spectrum because I'm sure you've learned a lot about how to fit the spectrum with a Bayesian approach in the earlier tutorials, and you will hear more about Sherpa tomorrow in the tutorial. But I wanted to point out that at this point, you can use any of the Sherpa tools, for example, to actually do the fitting of this spectrum. All right, I'm gonna continue now with cross-matching, but I wanted to stop again to see if there are any questions at this point. Is it that clear? Great.
Rafael, there are some questions in the chat.
Oh, okay.
And there's been a conversation, and I think there is a relevant question about the spectral analysis. Rudy is asking about ARF and RMF, and it says that this can be large files. Do you recommend a dry run-like example before adding all those products?
I'm not sure I actually understand that question. You mean because the ARF and RMF files could be large,
and
yes.
you end up with getting all the OBS IDs, so you would have all these unnecessary files. The download would be quite large, I'd imagine.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you probably want to make sure first As far as I'm aware, there is no way to select a particular ops ID using search CSC. You can do that with CSC view, which is an advantage of using CSC view with respect to this. You can actually select, in that case, which ones you want to download. It will display them all, but then you can select which one to bring down and download them. So yes, you want to first check probably that your particular source doesn't have a whole lot. For example, if it's a source near the galactic center, you don't want to be probably, and you're interested in only in one particular observation of that source. You want to check first whether you want to actually download all of those, or if you want to use CSC view instead to download specific observations. So do mind that when you do this kind of searches with search CSC.
So it might be a hybrid of you figure out what's available here, and then you can go to CSC view to very specifically get a compact download.
Right. In general, for those more, for anything that you're afraid that this is gonna hang, you want to probably check with CSC view first, see how many you have, how many detections, or use the association tables that I shared before in order to check how many ops IDs are associated with a particular source before you actually bring down all the files in your Jupyter notebook. But I think the flexibility of the Jupyter notebook is that it allows you to do a workflow when you're interested, for example, in regions of a particular area of the sky or over a particular value of significance, etc., etc. You can do those selection nicely and bring your data products, etc., right down to your Jupyter notebook. I'm going to pause for a second because I need to plug my power, otherwise this is going to die. Give me a second.
I will. While you're doing that, we are at the hour, so I will tell everyone here that if you have to go, you have to go. I will be providing a recording of the full tutorial material that Juan provides on our YouTube channel. So if you do need to leave now, you can watch that video to follow on the rest of the next section that Rafael is going to cover.
I realize it's already past 11. It's not going to be much longer. I'm going to show you how to cross match the catalog with other catalogs, and then I'm going to briefly show you how to do machine learning with input from the Chandra source catalog. Very simple things, and that's it. So feel free to leave if you need to. If you want to watch the video later, that's fine. Otherwise, you can stay for another 10 or so minutes, and I finish the demonstration. Okay, were there other questions that were pending, Francesca or anyone?
There were a lot, but I think people have been, myself, Doug, and Rafael have been like,
oh, thanks for that,
right away, and some of them were not immediately relevant to parts of the notebook, but to other arguments that you just touched.
We will make sure to answer all of those questions as we go. Okay, I'm just gonna move on to cross-matching the Chandra source catalog with other catalogs. This is, of course, as you heard a lot in this conference, sometimes you want the optical or infrared data in order to characterize your source. That's, of course, not a necessarily straightforward exercise. You've heard in the conference about sophisticated ways with Bayesian approaches to actually match sources to sources. And what I'm gonna show you here is a very simple search that uses AstroPy to search for nearest neighbor sources, nothing complicated, but it helps me to illustrate how a possible way to do this cross-matching. So, and for that, I'm gonna move from an extragalactic search of the M33 galaxy to something more local. So I'm going to do a search around Orion Nebula. So again, I am going to create a coordinate object and I'm going to define a search radius for that search. And then I am going to just run my search, and that results in 927 CSC2 sources. Notice that I'm back to the master level here because I'm doing my consearch. So this will be the nominal kind of canonical values of the properties for a source, which can be very useful when you're interested in the overall properties of a source. If you want to go into the details of how the source is changing from observation to observation, then you want to go to the observation level. But in any case, I am going to use AstroQuery here to search Vizier in order to bring down the sources, the corresponding sources in that area of the sky from the 2MASS catalog. So here I'm using Vizier. Again, I do a search in Vizier. I create this object here with the name of the particular catalog that is the 2-mass catalog. And pretty much all the relevant columns here. And I am going to do a query around the same point, the same object with the same radius. And in that case, I got 1,300 2-mass sources. So I did the 2 different searches. And here I'm just plotting the 2-mass values, so the near infrared band fluxes, magnitudes, etc., etc. And now I am just going to grab the coordinates for both the 2-mass table and the Chandra source catalog table. And I am going to use the match to catalog Sky tool from AstroPy in order to do this match. So all this is going to do is going to take the Chandra source catalog and is going to look for matches in this other catalog using the coordinates with a nearest neighbor approach. Okay, so if you want to learn more about how this works, you can go to this link where it will be explained. And now I'm going to, so what this is going to give you is the corresponding IDs in the matched catalogs for those sources and the separations between the matches. So you can plot the separations as a histogram here in a logarithmic scale in both axes. And you see that this is kind of two-peaked. Of course, the Orion Nebula is a crowded field, and you expect that the nearest neighbors sometimes are not necessarily the actual match for that source. That's why I said this was not a very sophisticated cross match. But what you can do is you can say, okay, I'm going to ignore any matches that are beyond 1 arcsecond. Because I don't think these are real matches. So that's what I'm doing here. I am going to select the J and K magnitudes for the catalog, the 2-mass table, but only for separations in this distribution that are shorter than 1 arcsecond. And I am going to get the flux and the hardness ratio in the high and medium band from the Chandra source catalog table, also limiting myself to those separations. So basically, I'm only going to get this group of matches here. And that's it. Then I can just plot my matches. In this case, I am going to generate a hardness color diagram, a magnitude X-ray flux diagram, and that's it. You can, of course, then put your scientist hat on and say, okay, what's happening here? There's a correlation between the hardness ratio of these young stars and the color in the J and K bands. And this, occupies the expected locus in the distribution of X-ray fluxes versus J magnitudes for these young stellar objects. But of course, you can do this using any of the catalog properties and plot your things depending on different properties from different catalogs, which can be quite useful in order to explore or classify or understand different types of sources. All right, that's it. And finally, all that I want to show you here is how to do a little bit of machine learning with input from the Chandra source catalog. In fact, all I'm going to do is I'm going to do a very simple, not very meaningful clustering algorithm using scikit-learn, using these properties that I just defined here. So basically, I'm going to use these multi-wavelength properties as my features, and I am going to ask a machine learning algorithm to cluster objects based on those properties. So this is unsupervised learning. It's going to try to group objects based on the properties without knowing what those things are. It's just going to provide you a number of clusters that you can then use your scientific instinct to assign classes to, or whatever you want to do with it. So for that, as I said, you want to import scikit-learn, and in particular the k-means clustering algorithm. We did hear a little bit about k-means algorithm during the conference in the context of unsupervised classification of the source catalog. And I'm not going to go into the details here, but basically all you do here is you try to find the centroid of different clusters and then update those centroids based on the values of the properties until you get some convergence of a loss function in order to assign different objects to a particular cluster. And the typical input for you only need one array to do this as an input, and that is an array of the features for each of the object in your data set. So if you have I don't know how many we ended up having here, but if you have about 1,000 matches here, then you will have an array that will have 1,000 elements, and each of those elements will be a collection of the features. So for each of those 1,000 elements, you have the flux, the J, the color, and the hardness ratio, for example. So that's what I am constructing here. So the J magnitude, the color, then the flux in the X-ray, and the hardness ratio. So I'm just constructing a vector, an array, an NumPy array that will have as many elements as you have objects that you want to cluster, and that each of those elements is a vector of the four properties that the four features that you're going to use for this classification. In fact, it's 554 objects, not a whole lot. So usually you want to do this with more data, but this is just a demonstration. One thing that you often have to do in machine learning is data imputation. Of course, not all of these quantities will be defined for all of the objects, and that can be problematic when you pass, for example, a NaN to a scikit-learn. Depending on the specific thing you want to do, you want to mitigate that by doing data imputation. So that's basically replacing numbers that are NaNs with some value that you consider reasonable. So you can replace it with a 0 if you want, or you can replace it with a 1, or you can replace it with the mean value of that feature across all of the other objects, which is what I'm doing here. So I'm doing data imputation to do that. And then I am applying that imputation model to my object X. I'm going to call the resulting object X imputed, that it will be basically the same array, but with the replacements of all the NaNs with the mean value of the feature in question across all other objects where it's not a NaN. And then I am going to fit my k-means model. I am going to arbitrarily, for this demonstration, select 3 clusters. There are ways in which you can select what's the best number of clusters that you can use. And I am going to fit the model on the array I just created. And that's it. And when you do that, this parameter here has to do with whether this is a random seed. Basically, if you want to reproduce, for this to be reproducible, you can always use a number here to make your random generator the same every time you run it. And I am just going to now plot my clusters that will be displayed here in the last part of this tutorial. And this is not extremely meaningful. It's just a very, very simple thing. But all this did was it took all the 4 properties, all the 4 features, and I attempted to separate them in 3 clusters, because I specifically asked them to use 3 clusters, and do a clustering of those. And it looks like it mostly used the brightness information, the magnitudes, and the fluxes, etc., but it also used a little bit of information about the colors and the hardness ratios in order to generate those clusters. So this is a very interesting way to do clustering and non-supervised learning when you have many properties across different wavelength regimes. You can try to do that using all the 2 mask colors and all the hardness ratios and see where your sources fall. Or you could also attempt a supervised approach in which you provide a training set with labels for a part of this object. But that's, as we have heard, it's possible, and some people have done really nice job doing that, but it's also hard because training sets are hard to construct. Okay, that's really what I had for today. I hope this encourages you to use the Chandra source catalog